The summer air was thick with pine and the sound of insects buzzing lazily in the golden light. Lily, just 8 years old, darted around the edge of the lake, her laughter echoing through the trees. Her father, Mark, watched her with a weary smile from the old wooden bench outside their rented mountain cabin. It was meant to be a bonding trip, just the two of them, away from the noise of the city, away from the tension that had quietly taken root in their family home. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm and quiet, surrounded by dense forest and rocky slopes. Lily collected smooth stones, occasionally calling out to Mark to show him a favorite. He nodded, distracted, his phone in hand. A work call had pulled his attention, and when he looked up again, she was no longer in sight. "Lily," he called, standing abruptly. He scanned the shoreline. Nothing. He walked to the water's edge, heart picking up pace. "Lily." Louder this time. No reply. He jogged toward the woods, peering between the trees, his voice echoing in panic. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence around the lake grew heavier, unnatural. The wind had died down, and only his ragged breathing filled the air. An hour later, drenched in sweat and hoarse from shouting, Mark stumbled into the ranger's station, trembling. "My daughter, she's gone," he choked out. Rangers sprang into action, and soon a search team was combing the forest with dogs and flashlights as night crept in. Helicopters came the next day. Volunteers joined in. But there was no sign of Lily, no footprints, no clothing, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. And through it all, Mark's story remained unchanged. She had been there one moment and gone the next. But quiet doubt began to spread. The father who brought her here alone. The father who was distracted. The father who couldn't explain how a little girl simply disappeared. A year had passed, but the wound left by Lily's disappearance was still raw and bleeding. The once warm home of the Harris family had grown cold and silent. The living room, once filled with toys and laughter, now sat untouched, Lily's favorite doll still perched on the shelf, her shoes by the door where she'd last left them. Her mother, Elaine, had stopped setting the dinner table for 3 months ago, finally accepting that her daughter wouldn't be coming home. Elaine no longer looked at Mark the same way. In the beginning, they held each other through the grief, cried together on the kitchen floor. But suspicion slowly crept in like rot. There were things that didn't add up. Why hadn't Mark noticed Lily missing sooner? Why did his story never change, word for word, like something rehearsed? Why had there been no sign of struggle, no clue left behind? Elaine asked these questions quietly at first, then loudly, desperately. Mark's answers were always the same, always hollow. Eventually, the silence between them became louder than the fights. Daniel, their 14-year-old son, watched the unraveling from the sidelines. Once cheerful and open, he now barely spoke. He kept his eyes glued to his phone or locked behind his bedroom door. At school, he was the boy whose sister vanished. Friends kept their distance, unsure of what to say. He avoided the lake in every dream, though sometimes it pulled him there anyway, in flashes of water, screams, or the eerily calm trees that surrounded the place where Lily disappeared. Mark moved out 6 months after the anniversary of the tragedy. He claimed it was temporary, but Elaine didn't argue. She'd already started calling him, "the man I used to love," in her head. Rumors in the town stirred like dust in the wind. Some said Mark had snapped, others whispered about a custody battle that never was. The police, lacking evidence, had dropped the case into the cold files. But for the Harris family, time hadn't moved on. It had only stood still, haunting them with what-ifs and the unbearable absence of a little girl who had once chased butterflies by the lake. 10 years had passed, but the weight of Lily's disappearance still clung to Daniel like a shadow. Now 24, he lived alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, working late hours at a repair shop and avoiding questions about his family. He rarely spoke to his father and only occasionally visited his mother, who had aged more than a decade's time should allow. Grief had carved lines into her face, and Lily's room remained untouched, a quiet shrine no one dared disturb. Daniel had tried to move on. He told himself the past was buried, that some wounds couldn't be healed. But lately, he had been waking up drenched in sweat, fragments of memories clawing their way to the surface. At first, they were just flashes, trees, water, the sun blinding his eyes. Then came the sound of raised voices, a girl's scream, and the sudden, terrifying silence that followed. Something inside him was shifting, like a locked door slowly cracking open. It wasn't until a therapy session, prompted by a breakdown at work, that Daniel began to say it aloud. The therapist, patient and quiet, had asked about Lily. About that day. Daniel hadn't planned to say anything. But as he spoke, the memories spilled out, not just of the lake, but of something he had hidden even from himself. He remembered standing behind the cabin, watching through the trees. Lily and their father were arguing. It wasn't like them. Lily's face was red, angry, and Mark's voice was sharp, unfamiliar. Then, Lily turned and ran toward the slope behind the lake. Mark followed. Daniel trailed behind, confused, not wanting to be seen. Then it happened, a stumble, a scream, and Lily fell. Not far, but the wrong way. Her small body tumbled down the rocks and disappeared from view. Daniel froze. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He remembered his father climbing down to her, staying still for a long time, then looking around, panicked. The memory stopped there, but it was enough. Enough to crack open the years of silence. Daniel sat in the therapist's office, trembling, realizing that what he'd buried wasn't just trauma, it was the truth. Something his father had never admitted. Something that could finally explain what happened to Lily. The rain fell in a slow, steady drizzle as Daniel stood outside his father's house, staring at the door he hadn't knocked on in nearly 3 years. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sickly glow on the faded welcome mat. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had come to do. He had rehearsed the words countless times, but now, standing here, his mouth felt dry and his hands refused to stop shaking. When the door opened, Mark stood there, older and thinner than Daniel remembered. His once proud posture had slouched, his eyes sunken and hollow. "Daniel," he said quietly, as if unsure the figure before him was real. "Come in, son." The house smelled like dust and loneliness. Framed photos of the past still lined the mantel, family vacations, birthdays, and, of course, Lily. The girl who had vanished. The girl whose face haunted them both. They sat across from each other in silence until Daniel finally spoke. "I remember what happened." Mark didn't respond right away, but his hands gripped the edge of his chair. Daniel's voice was steady now, filled with quiet resolve. "That day at the lake. You were arguing. She ran. She fell. And you didn't call for help." The room seemed to shrink around them. Mark's lips parted, but no words came. For a long moment, he stared at the floor as if trying to erase it with his eyes. Then, with a shuddering breath, he whispered, "I didn't mean for it to happen." He broke down. The years of silence, guilt, and denial came flooding out. He told Daniel everything, how Lily had slipped, how he climbed down and found her motionless, how he panicked. He hadn't known if she was dead or alive, but he had been terrified. He didn't trust the police, didn't trust himself. So he had hidden her body, deep in a ravine behind the cliff, and told no one. Not even Daniel. Not even Elaine. Daniel listened, a storm of grief and fury swirling inside him. He could see the boy he had been, frozen in the trees, unable to process what he had witnessed. But now he was a man, and he knew what had to be done. He stood up and said, "You have to turn yourself in." Mark nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. The next day, authorities were led to the site Mark described. Skeletal remains were recovered, confirmed to be Lily's. The truth finally surfaced after a decade of pain and silence. Mark was arrested, and while justice felt both too late and not enough, it was something. At Lily's new burial, Daniel stood beside his mother, who wept softly, holding his hand. There were no words that could undo the past, but the truth had been spoken, and that mattered. For the first time in 10 years, Daniel felt like the shadow over their lives had lifted, just a little.